The first thing people noticed about Elias Ramez wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. He moved through the neighborhood like a man trying not to disturb the air, quiet steps, plain clothes, eyes that tracked details other people edited out. The kind of person who could stand in a crowd and still feel alone, not because he wanted to, but because his mind was always measuring something. He rented a small upper-floor apartment on the edge of District 9, a place of sun-baked sidewalks, aging brick, and water pipes so old the city had stopped pretending they wouldn't break. On the hottest days, the taps coughed air before they gave you anything cold. Everyone complained about it. Everyone joked about it. And then everyone learned to live around it. Elias didn't complain. He listened. He listened to the building's plumbing groan at night when demand spiked. He listened to the street valve shudder when the pressure dropped. He listened to the arguments between neighbors about whose turn it was to call the city again. He listened to the way people said, "It's always been like this," as if the sentence was a lock on the future. In the mornings, he walked to work without earbuds. He passed the old railway underpass, the shuttered corner shop, the empty lot that everyone forgot because nothing ever happened there. And behind the chain-link fence at the far end of that lot sat the rusting skeleton of a water tower, cylindrical, flaking, tagged with graffiti, leaning slightly like it was tired of standing. It had been built decades ago, back when the district was smaller and the municipal grid didn't reach this far. Then the city modernized, rerouted, centralized. The tower was decommissioned and left behind like a bone after the animal moved on. Elias stopped in front of it for the first time on a Monday, so hot the air looked warped. He didn't stare like a tourist. He studied it like a diagram. The tower's legs were still solid, old steel, overbuilt. The base platform was intact, though corroded. The tank itself was sealed, but not airtight. The ladder was a hazard, but it was there. And most importantly, the tower still had elevation. It still had gravity. He came back the next day with a notebook. He mapped the slope of the neighborhood streets, the drainage points, the roof lines. He noted where runoff went after a storm, where puddles collected, where the wind carried dust. He marked the old utility access points near the lot, the ones the city had stopped maintaining but never fully removed. He didn't do it dramatically. No speeches. No declarations of "I'll save everyone." Just pencil lines and numbers, like he was building a world on paper. A week later, he bought the lot. It wasn't a clean purchase. The paperwork was tangled in old disputes and forgotten liens. The lot had passed through hands like a cursed object. But Elias had patience. He was used to systems that resisted change. He knew where to apply pressure, which office to visit, which form to request, which clerk to speak to twice, so his name became familiar. By the time the sale went through, District 9 had already given him a nickname. Tower Guy. They said it with the kind of amusement that required no cruelty to still be insulting. "You're fixing that thing." Mr. Geller from the auto shop laughed when Elias walked past. "What are you going to do? Become the mayor of water?" A group of teenagers mimicked climbing motions when he passed. "Yo, Tower Guy. Don't fall." Even Mrs. Hina, who sold spices and bottled tea from the corner, shook her head gently. "Elias, Beta, that tower is dead. The city won't even fix our pipes. Why you waste your money?" Elias bought 2 bottles of her tea and said, "It's not dead. It's unused." That was all. And then he started working. He didn't bring a crew. He didn't hire loud machines. He worked at hours when the sun was low and the street had fewer eyes. Sometimes early morning, sometimes late evening. He wore gloves and carried tools in a plain duffel bag. At first, the only sign of change was the fence. He replaced broken chain link with sturdier panels and installed a simple locked gate. Then a tarp went up, thick, industrial, blocking sight lines from the sidewalk. People complained about that too. "What's he hiding?" someone muttered outside the grocery store. "Probably growing something illegal," another replied, half joking, half hoping the joke was true. Elias didn't respond. He just kept building his hidden world behind that tarp. Inside the lot, the air smelled like rust, and sun-warmed metal. The tower's ladder creaked when he climbed, but he tested each rung before trusting it. At the top, he opened access panels and found what he expected: residue, sediment, and old coating that had cracked like dried paint. He spent days scraping, cleaning, disinfecting. Then came reinforcement, patching corrosion, sealing seams, replacing old bolts with stainless steel. He treated the tank like a living organ that needed surgery, not demolition. Every repair had to consider what came next. Because Elias wasn't just restoring a tower. He was rebuilding a system. A system engineer's brain didn't see water tower. It saw flow, failure points, redundancy, load, contamination risk, energy requirements. Municipal water depended on pumps and pressure stations, electricity and maintenance, and someone, somewhere, doing their job. Gravity didn't need permission. Elias built a catchment frame at the base of the tower, angled metal sheets and gutters designed to channel rain into a pre-filter chamber. He scavenged materials from scrapyards and clearance auctions, paying cash, asking no unnecessary questions. For filtration, he didn't rely on one method. That was how people got hurt, trusting a single layer. He created a tiered system. First sediment screens, then activated carbon cartridges, then a slow sand filter in a sealed drum, then a final UV stage powered by a small solar panel bank. He installed a manual bypass too, because electronics failed, because storms could come with dust, because nothing worked forever. Everything he built had a backup, and a backup for the backup. He was careful with the noise, but some things couldn't be hidden. A few neighbors saw him unloading blue barrels at dawn. Others noticed delivery trucks that came without logos. Once, someone spotted the glint of solar panels over the tarp. Rumors grew. One evening, a man from the building next door leaned against the fence, cigarette hanging from his lips. "Hey, tower guy," he called. "You building your own city in there?" Elias paused, hand on the gate lock. He looked at the man, expression neutral. "I'm building margin," he said. The man blinked. "Margin for what?" Elias unlocked the gate and slipped inside without answering. Inside, he kept a whiteboard on the wall of a small shed he'd assembled from prefabricated panels. It was filled with neat handwriting: assume failure, prioritize water over comfort, store what you cannot produce, make output predictable, train under constraint. He tracked water volumes like an accountant tracks money. He measured filter throughput, calculated consumption rates per person, estimated what a small district could survive on in an emergency. He didn't plan for a miracle. He planned for scarcity. The city helped him without knowing it. That summer, the rains came irregularly, short bursts that hit hard and vanished. The tower's catchment worked exactly as designed. The first heavy rain filled his pre-filter chamber. The second brought enough to test flow rates. The third allowed him to flush and rinse the system like a new set of lungs learning to breathe. He treated every drop like evidence. The more he tested, the more confident he became. He ran samples through cheap test kits, then through better kits. Then, because he didn't trust cheap kits, he sent occasional samples to a lab under a private name. Everything came back within safe thresholds after filtration. He didn't celebrate. He added another filter stage anyway. By late summer, the tower was no longer a rusting corpse behind a tarp. It was a functioning, self-contained water reserve with a gravity-fed delivery line that ran down into the lot's shed, where he'd installed a simple distribution manifold. From that manifold, he had prepared multiple output options: hose fills, container stations, and the beginnings of a line that could be extended outward if needed. He didn't extend it yet, not because he couldn't, because the city was still supplying water, and because people had a way of taking what they didn't respect. Elias knew that lesson from systems too. When things work quietly, people assume they can't fail. When they fail loudly, people panic. He wanted time to do it right. But time, in the real world, didn't ask for permission. In early September, the heat arrived like an accusation. The weather reports used words like historic and record-breaking. District 9 lived under a sun that felt closer than it should. Asphalt softened. Metal railings burned to the touch. The air inside apartments turned heavy, as if oxygen itself was tired. City water demand surged. Everyone ran taps, showered more, watered dying plants, tried to rinse away the feeling of being cooked alive. The pressure dropped. At first it was just a slower flow. Then an hour with nothing. Then morning water only. Then a brown tint that made people hesitate before drinking. Residents crowded around the building manager's office to complain. "It's the city," the manager shouted, sweating through his shirt. "They said they're working on it." Working on it, Elias thought, meant they were juggling too many failures at once. He began moving differently. That Friday night, he went to the lot and stayed longer than usual. He ran system checks. He charged batteries. He filled every spare container he owned and lined them up inside the shed like silent soldiers. He wrote a new line on the whiteboard, "Assume sabotage." He didn't know why he wrote it. Not yet. The next day, a city maintenance truck rolled down the street, then drove away without stopping. People watched from balconies as if watching would change the outcome. On Sunday, the taps ran for 12 minutes in the morning, then died completely. By afternoon, District 9 felt the first real edge of fear. Shops raised prices on bottled water. The grocery shelves emptied. People argued in aisles over the last case like it was medicine. Someone tried to pry open the locked storage cage behind the corner shop and got chased off. At dusk, Elias stood on his apartment balcony and looked down the street. The air shimmered. In the distance, the water tower behind his tarp stood like a shadowed monument, unnoticed by most, mocked by many. He watched the neighborhood lights flicker once, twice, just a tremble, not a failure. But it made his stomach tighten, because systems didn't fail all at once. They failed in sequence. And when they reached the final link, the collapse looked sudden to everyone who wasn't paying attention. Elias closed his balcony door and pulled a folder from a drawer. Inside were maps he'd drawn by hand, notes on valve locations, the tower's output limits, distribution plans, ration schedules. Next to them were printed emails from the city, complaint acknowledgments, vague promises, the kind of language designed to postpone responsibility. He stared at the maps for a long time. Then he got up, grabbed his duffel bag, and left the apartment. Outside, the street was hotter than it should have been at night. People sat on stoops, fanning themselves, talking loudly to drown out the anxiety. Somewhere, a child cried for water. Elias walked past them without stopping, heading toward the lot. As he approached, he noticed something that didn't belong. A city worker van was parked near the corner, unmarked, lights off. Two men stood near the curb, silhouettes against the streetlight. They weren't residents. Their posture was wrong. Too still, too observant. One of them held something long and metallic that caught the light for a second. Elias slowed, heart quiet but alert. He didn't turn his head too quickly. He didn't make it obvious. He just watched, the way he always did. The men moved toward the old underground access hatch beside the lot, one Elias had mapped weeks ago. And then Elias understood why he'd written the word sabotage. Because somebody wasn't waiting for the pipes to fail naturally. Somebody was helping. He stepped back into the shadow of a parked car, unseen, as the two men knelt at the hatch and began to work. Inside his duffel bag, his phone buzzed with a city alert. Water service interruption. Unknown cause. Do not use tap water until further notice. Elias stared at the message. Then he looked at the men, and he realized that if he did nothing, District 9 wouldn't just go dry. It would go desperate. He took a slow breath, lowered his duffel bag to the ground, and reached for the one tool he'd promised himself he'd never need. Elias kept his breathing shallow and his posture loose, the way you do when you're trying not to convince your own body to panic. The two men by the underground hatch worked with the casual precision of people who had done this before. No arguing, no wasted motion. One kept his shoulders angled toward the street, watching for witnesses. The other leaned over the hatch with a tool that looked like a specialized wrench. not a resident, not city maintenance. A professional. Elias didn't charge at them. He didn't shout. Drama was for people who believed the world corrected itself when you made noise. He pulled his phone out, dimmed the screen, and opened his camera. He steadied his hands against the car's roof and recorded 10 seconds, then 20, keeping the frame tight. The men's faces were half hidden under caps, but their build, their tools, the van, evidence. Not perfect evidence, but enough to show intent. Then he stopped recording, because if he kept filming, he'd keep watching. And watching was not the same as acting. The hatch cover lifted with a soft grind of metal. The man nearest it reached inside and pulled up a bundle of cables and piping couplings like he knew exactly what he wanted. He exchanged a quick nod with the lookout. Elias ran through his map mentally. That access hatch connected to an old pressure junction feeding District 9's North Line. If you damaged it in the right place, you didn't just reduce pressure. You contaminated the line, triggered a safety shutoff, forced the city to issue a do not use warning. Panic wasn't a side effect. It was the point. Elias backed away from the car, stepping into deeper shadow, and angled toward the side alley that led behind the tarp fence. If he could reach the lot unseen, he could lock down his own system and then decide how to respond. Protect the tower first. Without it, there was no plan. He moved with the careful economy of a man who had rehearsed emergencies in his head for years. The gate appeared, his gate, solid steel latch, padlock, camera above it. He slipped inside and pulled it closed without letting it clang. The shed sat at the base of the tower like a small, stubborn heart, lights off, silent. He crossed to the control panel and switched the system to internal. No outward line. No accidental backflow. He checked the battery charge, the UV stage, the filter pressure. Everything was stable. Then he climbed the tower ladder halfway and peered over the tarp line toward the street. The men were still working. Elias's mind did what it always did under threat. It turned fear into sequence. If he called the police, response time would be slow, if they came at all. If he confronted them alone, he could get hurt, and then the tower might become someone else's asset. If he waited, the sabotage would complete, and the district would fracture within hours. He needed another variable. Another human. Someone who could move fast and keep quiet. He climbed down and stepped out through the side door of the lot, not the main gate. He cut behind the abandoned warehouse and crossed 2 streets to the only place still open, Mrs. Hina's corner shop. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed weakly. The shelves were half-picked clean already. A line of anxious customers stood near the counter, clutching whatever they could grab, bottled juice, crackers, a few precious water jugs. Mrs. Hina saw Elias immediately. Her eyes narrowed the way they did when she sensed bad news before it was spoken. "Elias," she said quietly, leaning forward. "Tap's dead. People fighting already." "I know," he replied. "I need your nephew." Her expression tightened. "Zane." Elias nodded. "He has a motorbike. He can move without attention. I need him to deliver a message, one message, fast." Mrs. Hina hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she reached under the counter, pulled out her phone, and typed. Her fingers moved with urgency, not panic. "Tell me the message," she said. Elias leaned in, voice low and controlled. "Someone is sabotaging the pressure junction. I have proof. I need Zane to go to the district service office, now, before they lock down. He must find Engineer Kumar. Not the front desk. Kumar." Mrs. Hina's eyes flickered. "Kumar, the one who used to fix our water last year." Elias nodded again. "He's the only one who won't dismiss it." She pressed send without asking more. Outside, the air felt heavier. People were gathering on sidewalks, talking loud, arguing louder. The heat was still trapped between buildings like a hand over a mouth. Elias walked back toward the lot, but he didn't take the same route. He passed the hatch location from across the street and caught another glimpse. The sabotage was almost finished. One man lowered something into the opening, dark canister, maybe. The other tightened a coupling. Their movements were calm, as if they were assembling furniture, not dismantling a neighborhood's last stability. Elias took one more short video, then slipped away. Back inside the lot, he made changes he had hoped to delay. He pulled out the distribution plan and adapted it for chaos. He didn't have enough water to supply everyone at full use. Not even close. The tower was a buffer, not magic. But a buffer could prevent collapse if managed correctly. He wrote a new schedule on the whiteboard. Priority 1. Children under 10, elderly, medically fragile. Priority 2. 1 household rep per building, controlled pickup. Priority 3. No bulk fills. No resale. Rules, 1 warning. Then ban. He hated the last line. It felt cold. But systems that didn't enforce boundaries got exploited until they died. He set up the shed's exterior, 2 fill stations, separated, with clear flow control valves. He added a temporary barrier route, so people could line up without crushing the gate. He installed motion lights, not bright enough to attract attention from far, but enough to remove shadows near the entrance. Then he called the one person in District 9 who might help enforce order. Marta Lane, building manager, ex-military, the kind who spoke in short sentences and never smiled during emergencies. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice already tense. Elias, I need you to come to the old lot, he said. Silence. Then why? Because the city water isn't just failing. It's being forced to fail. And when people get thirsty, they'll come here. I need a line. I need rules. I need someone who can hold them. Another pause. Are you telling me you fixed that tower? I'm telling you it works, Elias said. And it's the only controlled supply we have. Marta exhaled, sharp. I'm coming. Don't open anything until I'm there. Elias ended the call and stood still for a moment, listening. A distant shout echoed down the street. Then another. Glass cracked somewhere. Maybe a bottle dropped. Maybe something worse. The district was tipping. His phone vibrated again. Another city alert. Do not use tap water. Potential contamination. Crews dispatched. Elias stared at the words. The sabotage had succeeded. The city was reacting, but too late. The warning itself would cause more damage than the contamination. People would rush stores, hoard, accuse. And worse, people would start hunting for any alternative supply. They would remember the tower. They would remember Tower Guy. Not as a joke, as a target. When Marta arrived 20 minutes later, she came with 2 men from her building, broad-shouldered, quiet, already sweating. She took one look at the lot setup, the tarp, the shed, the tower looming above, and her expression shifted from disbelief to calculation. How much do you have? She asked. Elias handed her a clipboard with his estimates. Enough for controlled rations for 3 days, maybe 4, if we limit non-essential use. After that, we need rain or resupply. Marta scanned the numbers. People will riot for water before they accept rationing. I know, Elias said. She looked up at him sharply. Then why tell anyone at all? Keep it for yourself. Elias met her eyes. Because if I keep it for myself, I'm safe for a week, and the district burns around me. Then I'm not safe at all. Marta stared at him for a beat, then nodded as if that was the only answer that made sense. Fine. We do it your way, but we do it hard. They moved fast. Marta posted 2 volunteers at the gate. She used her phone to blast a message into the building groups. A controlled water pickup point would open at dawn. 1 representative per household. Bring clean containers. No pushing. No fighting. Elias didn't love the broadcast. It would spread beyond the building groups. It would reach the wrong people. But secrecy was already broken. The city alerts had created a wave. Waves didn't stop because you asked them politely. Night fell. The heat didn't. From the top of the tower, Elias watched District 9 like a pilot watching a storm front. He saw groups forming at intersections, talking in circles. He saw a small crowd outside the grocery store that had already run out of water. He saw a police cruiser drift past without stopping, windows up, as if they could ignore thirst by refusing to look at it. Near midnight, The first people arrived at the lot. Not families, not building reps. 3 men, moving with the confidence of entitlement. One carried an empty gas can, cleaned out, probably, ready to be filled. Another had a baseball bat resting on his shoulder like an accessory. They stopped at the gate and stared through the tarp seams at the dark shape of the tower. One of them called out, loud, "Yo, tower guy, we know you got water." Marta stepped forward from the shadows near the gate. "Come back at dawn. 1 container per household." The man laughed. "Household? Nah, we're doing it now." He moved closer, testing the latch. "Open up, or we open it." Elias felt something cold settle into his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition. This was the phase he'd planned for in theory, but never wanted to see in real life. The moment when rules met desperation and desperation chose violence. Elias picked up his phone and began recording again. Evidence, always. But evidence didn't stop a bat. Marta raised her voice. "Last warning." The man with the bat stepped back, then swung. The impact hit the gate with a sharp metallic ring. The padlock shuddered but held. The man cursed and swung again, harder. From the street behind them, more footsteps approached. Shadows. Voices. Not a line. A crowd. They were coming faster than Elias had calculated. Marta turned her head slightly, eyes on Elias without looking away from the gate. "How many batteries do you have left?" Elias understood what she meant. "Lights. Sound. Deterrence. I can run the floodlights," he said. "But if they cut power lines, they don't need to cut power," Marta snapped. "They'll cut people." The third swing landed, and the padlock finally cracked. The gate rattled loose. The man grinned like he'd won something. Elias's mind raced. If they breached the lot, they would rush the shed, contaminate the fill stations, destroy the filters, take what they could, spill the rest. The tower would become worthless overnight. He turned and ran toward the shed. Inside, he grabbed the emergency kit he had assembled for the worst case. A portable siren, a flare, and a small canister labeled in block letters. Chlorine shock. Do not inhale. Not a weapon. A tool. A last resort to deny access if the system was compromised. He heard the gate finally give way. He heard Marta shouting. He heard the first footfall inside the lot. And then he heard something else, an engine. A motorbike, approaching fast. Elias stepped outside the shed just as Zane skidded into the alley entrance. Helmet on, eyes wide. Zane yelled over the engine. "Elias." Kamar says. A shout cut him off as a figure lunged from the shadows near the gate. The bat swung toward Zane's head. Elias didn't think. He moved. He grabbed the flare, struck it, and the night exploded with bright, violent light. The attacker stumbled back, blinded for half a second. But half a second was not a solution, because the crowd was already inside, and now they could see exactly what they'd come for. Elias stood between the shed and the flood of desperate bodies, flare burning in his hand, and realized that the next minute would decide whether District 9 survived with order, or tore itself apart for a few gallons of water. The flare hissed like an angry star, throwing harsh light across the lot. Faces appeared where there had only been shadows, sweat-streaked, tight-jawed, hungry-eyed. Not monsters. People. People pushed past their limits by heat, by thirst, by the quiet terror of realizing the city could no longer promise the basics. Elias held the flare out, not to threaten, but to buy a second of thinking. "Back!" Marta barked, stepping in front of the gate with her 2 men. "Nobody goes past the line." The man with the bat recovered first. He blinked hard, anger returning faster than sight. "Move," he spat. "We're taking what's ours." "You don't own this," Marta said. "And if you rush it, you'll ruin it. Then nobody gets water." That last sentence landed differently. A few people in the crowd shifted. Some looked past Marta toward the shed, then up at the tower, as if seeing it for the first time not as a joke, but as an impossible hope. The man with the bat laughed again, but it sounded thin. "You think we care? We're thirsty now." Elias's thoughts clicked into a plan with the speed of a circuit completing. He turned to Zane, who had killed the bike engine, and ripped off his helmet. Zane's face was pale, eyes locked on the bat like he'd just realized how close he'd come to dying. "Kamar," Elias said quickly. "What did he say?" Zane swallowed. "He said the junction was hit with a chemical canister. Not an accident. He sent a crew, but," his voice shook, "he said the contamination warning will stand for at least 48 hours. Minimum. 48 hours. The crowd didn't hear the exact number, but they heard the tone. They smelled bad news the way a dog smells smoke. A woman at the back shouted, 48 hours. My baby needs water. Another voice cracked, my father's on heart meds. The crowd surged forward half a step like a single organism trying to inhale. Marta raised her arm. Stop. The Batman stepped sideways, trying to angle past her toward the shed. Elias saw it instantly. If one person broke through, the rest would follow. Rules would vanish. The filters would be smashed. The tower would be contaminated by dirty containers and panic hands. The system would die in 1 minute. Elias didn't want to use the chlorine shock. It was for flushing equipment, denying access. In open air it could harm people if misused. But he also knew a brutal truth. If this place was overrun, injuries would happen anyway. Stomping, fighting, broken glass, desperate force. And then there would be no water for anyone. He made a decision that felt like swallowing metal. He spoke loudly, not yelling, but sharp enough to cut through noise. Listen. A few heads turned. Many didn't. Desperation made people deaf. Elias lifted the flare higher, the light catching eyes, forcing attention. This tower produces clean water only if it stays clean. If you break the shed, if you rush the valves, if you contaminate the intake, you will get nothing. Not later. Not tomorrow. Nothing. The Batman scoffed and started forward again. Elias turned his head slightly toward Marta, just enough for her to read his face. Then he did the one thing he hated most. He used fear as a tool. He stepped toward the crowd, flare sizzling, and held up the chlorine shock canister in his other hand. This is not a weapon, he said. It is a chemical flush. If the line is breached, I will dump it into the distribution manifold and destroy the output. I will ruin the water before I let you ruin the system. A wave of confusion rippled through the front row. Someone shouted, he'll poison it. Elias shook his head. No, I'll waste it. There's a difference. And I'm telling you now so you understand the cost of rushing. The Batman's grin faded. He hadn't expected resistance. He'd expected a lonely man with a secret stash, not a controlled system with a denial plan. He took a step back, calculating. Marta saw the shift and seized the moment like a commander grabbing high ground. You want water, she called out. Then you follow rules. 1 rep per household at dawn. Kids and elderly first. Containers must be clean. If you fight, you're out. If you steal, you're out. Who made you boss? Someone yelled. Marta's answer was simple and terrifying. The emergency did. A few people laughed nervously. A few nodded. Most just stared, torn between instinct and reason. Then a voice cut through from the side. An older man, thin, sweat-soaked, eyes bloodshot from the heat. We don't have time for your rules, he said, not angry, just exhausted. My wife can't go 2 days. Elias heard the truth inside that sentence. It wasn't greed. It was the edge of grief. He lowered the chlorine canister a fraction and looked at the man. What's her condition? The man blinked, surprised by the question. Diabetes. She's weak. She's dizzy. Elias nodded once. Bring her at dawn. Put her at the front. Marta will confirm. You will leave now and you will tell others. Order gets water. Chaos gets nothing. The man stared at Elias like he'd expected cruelty and found something else. He nodded slowly. And that, small, human, cracked the crowd's momentum. One person stepped back. Then another. People began to talk, not shout. The wave became a choppy sea instead of a flood. The Batman realized he was losing the room. His power depended on the crowd being a weapon. If the crowd chose patience, he became a single man with a bat against a gate, against witnesses, against consequences. He spat on the ground and pointed at Elias. This isn't over. Elias met his eyes, steady. It is, if you leave. The Batman hesitated, then backed out through the gate, dragging his two companions with him. He disappeared into the street, swallowed by darkness and heat. The lot went quiet in the aftermath, like a room after a slammed door. Elias released a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding. His arm ached from gripping the flare too long. He dropped it into the gravel, where it burned itself down and died. Marta's voice came softer now. We got through tonight. That's something. It's not enough, Elias said. Marta looked at him. What do you mean? Elias pointed toward the street beyond the tarp, where the district simmered with fear. They'll be back. Or someone else will. And the city will take days. Maybe longer. That junction sabotage wasn't random. It was targeted. Zane stepped forward, still shaky but present. Kamar thinks it's contractors, he said. Private. He said the city's been fighting a bidding war over pipeline upgrades. Someone wants the district desperate, so they'll accept anything. Elias felt anger rise, clean and focused. Water as leverage. Thirst as negotiation. He turned back toward the shed. Then we changed the leverage. All night, they worked. Elias didn't just plan distribution. He built governance. He and Marta created a simple volunteer roster. Gate control, line control, sanitation checks, ration logging. They set up a hand wash station with a diluted disinfectant bucket to keep containers from contaminating the fill valves. They marked the ground with tape lines and posted rules on plywood in thick marker. No speeches, just instructions. At dawn, District 9 arrived. Not as a mob, as a crowd. There was a difference. People came with buckets, bottles, clean jugs. Some came with nothing but hope. Children clung to their parents' clothes. Old men leaned on canes. A pregnant woman sat on the curb, eyes closed, breathing through the heat. Elias stood near the shed, clipboard in hand, and watched the line form. Whispers moved through it like wind. That's the tower. He fixed it. They laughed at him. Now they didn't laugh. They watched him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The way people look at someone who has proven the world can be different, because it means their old certainty was wrong. Marta ran the line with strict calm. One rep, name and building. Containers on the table for check. The first fills went to those most at risk. Elias watched a mother press water to her child's lips, hands trembling. He watched an elderly man drink slowly, as if he didn't trust relief. He watched people step aside afterward, not lingering, because rules were holding. For 2 hours, it worked. Then the city arrived. Not with help. With authority. A white municipal truck pulled up and 2 officials stepped out with clipboards and bright vests. Behind them came a police car, slow and heavy like a threat. One official approached the gate and raised his voice. Who's in charge here? Marta didn't answer. Elias stepped forward, because he knew how systems treated things they couldn't control. I am, Elias said. The official looked him up and down, then glanced at the tower like it offended him. You can't distribute water without permits. This is unauthorized infrastructure. Elias felt the crowd stiffen behind him. The line quieted, fear returning in a new form, legal fear, the kind that stole hope with paperwork. Elias didn't argue emotionally. He used the only weapon he truly trusted, facts. I have lab results, he said. Filtration specs, flow logs, and video evidence of the sabotage at the junction last night. This is keeping people from dying until your system is restored. The official's eyes narrowed. Video evidence. Elias pulled out his phone and held it up. 2 men, unmarked van, working the junction hatch minutes before the contamination alert. Tools consistent with pipeline tampering. The official hesitated. The police officer behind him shifted, suddenly interested. Elias pushed. If you shut this down, people will riot for bottled water within an hour. You know that. Or you can cooperate, verify my output, and use this tower as a controlled relief point while you repair the grid. Your choice. The official opened his mouth, but the police officer spoke first, voice flat. Let me see the video. Elias showed it. The officer watched once, then twice, jaw tightening. He looked at the official. This isn't a citizen causing trouble. This is a crime scene. The official swallowed, suddenly aware that his clipboard was not the most powerful object here. Within 30 minutes, a city water engineer arrived, sunburned, exhausted, with the look of someone who had been awake for too long. He climbed the tower ladder with Elias, inspected the tank, the filters, the UV stage, the catchment. When he climbed back down, he didn't call it illegal. He called it impressive. He stepped to the crowd and raised his hands. This distribution point is now temporary municipal relief under emergency oversight. We will test output hourly. We will restore grid pressure as fast as possible. Until then, this tower stays open. The crowd exhaled like a single lung. Elias felt something he hadn't expected, not triumph, but a quieter weight lifting. The system had held. The plan had held. And now, the city, forced by reality, was adapting. Over the next 2 days, Elias slept in the shed in 2-hour intervals. He monitored output, replaced filter media, logged volumes. Marta ran volunteers like a machine. Zane became a runner, delivering messages, moving fast between buildings, telling people when to come, when to stay home. The Batman returned once, watching from a distance. But with police now posted nearby and the crowd disciplined, he didn't try to breach again. Predators preferred easy targets. On the 3rd day, the tap water returned, weak at first, then stable, then clear. People cheered when their sinks ran again as if the city had performed a miracle. Most forgot quickly how close the district had come to tearing itself apart. But not everyone forgot. On the evening, pressure was fully restored. Mrs. Hina came to the lot carrying a small tray of tea and cups. She handed one to Elias, her expression softer than it had been in months. You were right, she said. It wasn't dead. Elias stared at the tower, the old steel now clean and steady. The tarp was still up, but it felt less like secrecy now and more like protection. He shook his head slightly. I wasn't right, he said. I was early. Marta joined them, arms crossed. People don't respect preparation until they're punished for ignoring it. Elias took a sip of tea. It was warm, sweet, grounding. He looked out toward District 9, buildings packed tight, pipes hidden under streets, lives balanced on systems nobody thanked when they worked. Systems don't fail because people are evil, Elias said. They fail because people assume someone else is responsible. He set the cup down and wrote a final line on the whiteboard inside the shed, beneath the rest. Preparedness is not paranoia. It's respect for reality. Then he turned off the shed light, locked the gate, and stood beneath the tower one last time as the night air finally cooled. The city hadn't been saved by luck. It had been saved by a quiet man who refused to treat "it's always been like this" as an answer. And by a tower everyone called useless, until thirst made truth impossible to ignore. Strong closing line. When the city went dry, the only thing that mattered wasn't power or promises. It was the person who prepared while everyone else laughed.